What really caused COVID-19? Investigative journalist Elaine Dewar has spent months doing a really deep dive. She joins us with her new book on the origin of the deadliest pandemic in 100 years. Good morning.
Good morning.
Wow, this work is exhaustive, more than 400 pages.
And it was supposed to be 120, yes.
But there's so much detail because there is so much, I found there to be so much politics in science over this.
Exactly. And that was not exactly a revelation to me, but the depth of it and the extent of it, shocking. I mean, I entered this story thinking uh, perhaps there could be a lab issue involved here because Wuhan, which is in the center of China, is very far from the normal places where we find bats which carry various kinds of coronaviruses. But it turned out that the Wuhan Institute of Virology, for example, had a long and interesting relationship to U.S. funders and to China's funders, and that from the beginning, the government of China did its very best to extinguish any evidence of the first infections in human beings, which would have told us a great deal more about where this virus came from.
Right,
And politics
because
were happening on the US side as well.
right, and even in Canada as well. But going back to those first cases, it actually happened many, many years before 2019.
2012, exactly. Well, we can't say that they are the first cases of SARS-CoV-2, but certainly in a mine in the Yunnan province of China, 6 miners were working in a bat cave / copper mine, became extremely ill. 3 of them died, and you know the investigation that came after that really sort of suggested that they had been infected with something like a coronavirus. There were no publications that detailed anything about what happened to those miners and what they were infected with until much later, but we do know that samples from their lungs were sent to the Wuhan Institute of Virology to be studied by a gal named Shi Zhengli, and that only much, much later, after pushing and prodding, and the finding of a master's thesis and a PhD thesis, did anyone understand what had gone on there.
Right, and it doesn't, there aren't signs of an intentional leak. It could have been accidental, but it really shows, your research really shows how dangerous and maybe lacking in a lot of protocols so many labs are.
The problem here is regulation. So, for example, the Wuhan Institute of Virology created a level 4 lab, the highest containment lab for studying things like Ebola and now SARS-CoV-2. But that lab wasn't in operation until late 2018, and a number of experiments involving making viruses more infectious and more lethal were conducted in lower level containment labs at the WIV, funded, by the way, by the United States, which would not have permitted those same experiments in a level 2 lab that were taking place in China. So regulation is a huge issue. And when you have cross-border relationships between scientists and agencies, regulation becomes just about impossible.
Right, right. You know what? We could go on talking for half an hour about this because there are so many details in your book. Thank you for writing it, and we're going to let people know where they can get On the Origin of the Deadliest Pandemic in 100 Years because there are Canadian connections as well here. Elaine, thank you for joining us today. We'll have details at chch.com.
My pleasure. Bye-bye.